In part 2 of the RS50 Cosmetic Restoration, we go through the entire bike, tackling all the jobs needed to prepare it for final assembly of the bodywork. This includes fabrication of a remote choke cable, restoring any metal components that may be damaged or corroded, changing out the brake fluids, and refinishing the miscellaneous plastic parts. Starting with the choke assembly, you can see here that the bike has been fitted with a high-performance carb with a manual choke. Unfortunately, the choke plunger is almost impossible to access with the fairings on, and the client had to get around this problem with a piece of wire poking out from under the tank. So the first job is to adapt this concept using an off-the-shelf choke cable and bracket that can be relocated near the headstock. I start by removing the choke assembly and cutting away the plastic knob to expose the metal top of the plunger. I then silver solder a metal ferrule to the plunger, cut the end off the choke cable, and solder this to the other end of the ferrule. With the choke assembly refitted to the carb, I need to lock the cable sleeve in the correct position using a modified cable holder attached to the body of the carb itself. Now we can relocate the other end of the choke cable to the headstock by modifying the off-the-shelf bracket. With the bracket successfully trial fitted, I shot blast it along with the two side fairing brackets in preparation for a Cerakote finish. For all of the metal components, I'm using Cerakote H109, which is extremely close to the OE finish. After baking in the oven at 270 degrees for 2 hours, the parts come out looking great. And here you can see the bracket and choke cable finally installed and operational. That job complete, I decide to refinish the passenger footrest hanger brackets and kickstand in the same Cerakote H109 to match the finish of the other brackets. While I have the footrests apart, I take the opportunity to clean up some road rash, and then the parts are shot blasted, coated and oven baked for 2 hours before being reassembled and mounted back on the bike. To finish up the maintenance, I replace the damaged brake lever and clean out the front and rear brake master cylinders, replacing the old contaminated fluid with clean Liqui-Moly .4. So now I think I'll clean up the tail unit, which is basically the under tray. This is in good order. It doesn't need a full restoration or really any kind of refinishing, just a good clean. So I'll just put you on time lapse, strip it all down, give it a really nice good clean, and then basically just give it a good coating of back to black, and then that can go back on the bike. While we are working on the tail unit, I remove the extremely dirty pillion seat and give it a deep clean. And since it came out so well, I also do the same for the pilot seat. All that's left now is to clean and refinish where necessary any plastics that cannot be paint corrected, starting with the lower fairing extension and chin mouldings. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just show you the technique I'm going to use to try to recover some of the color in this plastic. So this is basically exactly the same plastics that they use on dirt bikes. Extremely flexible, you know, very durable, so it tends to, rather than crack if it gets hit, it just flexes. And there's plenty of, I think, videos on YouTube showing how this technique works on the dirt bike plastics. I don't think this is going to be any different. I can tell the material is the same. And so what's happened here is this has been probably its original color, I would say, was closer to the red on the decal. It's been exposed to sunlight, and this is absolutely normal. The color fades and the surface of the plastic oxidizes to give like that white, you can see it here, that white chalky look. So, you know, there's a couple of ways to do this. You could wet sand the surface back a little bit and then try to polish it. You've got to be very, very careful when you do that with these soft plastics, because there's a tendency when you're using the polisher, you can do it, but there's a tendency when you use the polisher to get the plastic too hot and melt it. Now, what I'm actually going to do probably on here is a combination, because there are some scratches here along the bottom. You can see I'm going to have to take those out probably with something like 1,000 wet and dry, which will definitely leave the matte finish on the plastic, and I won't be able to recover that easily without polishing. However, for the rest of the part, I'm going to use the more common technique for restoring the color and removing the oxidization, and that's the heat gun. And I've actually just done a trial test on a little corner here of the plastic just to make sure it's going to be okay with this material. I always recommend that if you're going to use this technique, because some materials melt or, you know, soften and lose form at a lot lower temperatures than others, and you don't want to just go with this method and hit it with the air gun and then ruin your part. So try, if you're going to use this technique, try to find a part on, like say here, that's hidden normally under the side fairing, that you can just test the technique on and get a feel for the material, because it's going to be all about getting a feel for where the material, you know, where its melting point is, and not going beyond that. So anyway, I've done a quick trial. I think this method's going to work well. So what I'm going to do now, give everything a thorough clean, try to get all these scuff marks out, contamination off the part, and then I'll bring you back and show you the technique. But basically we're going to take the hot air gun on the high setting, and we're going to heat the surface of the plastic. As you heat it up, you'll start to see the color change, and then you'll get to a point where, and I'll try to show this in the video if I can capture it, you'll get to a point where you start to see the color switch from the kind of white chalky color to like the original color. Basically what you're doing is melting the surface of the plastic to get rid of the oxidization and bring some of the color back up to the surface. What happens is with the technique usually, and again I'll try to capture it for you, as you heat up you'll start to see the color change, but at that point when you first get the color change, if you stop, you'll see it'll try to return back to the original color, because it'll immediately cool, and depending on how much of the plastic was effectively melted, you know, will determine how far back it goes back to the original. So what you got to do is just keep pushing it a little bit further, and you remove the heat and see at what point, as it's trying to return back to the original color, you'll see it. The more you heat it up and move the hot air gun over it, the more, and then remove it, the hotter you get, remove it,
you'll see that the color will slowly start to not switch back. It'll remain more like the color it is when you remove it. And ideally, the scenario you want to get to is you get to what you think, you know, what looks like the almost the original color. It'll never be perfect. And then when you remove the gun, hot air gun, it stays that color. It's very, very, let's say, you know, you've got to be very careful, because it's not far beyond that point that the plastic will melt, and then you've really got a problem on your hands trying to recover it. So anyway, I'll put the camera on normal record. We'll see if we can try to capture some of that for you. Okay, so I don't know how easy, again, I don't really know how easy it is for the camera to pick that up, but that's a significant improvement. So basically you could see then I just applied the hot air gun to this corner piece, and you should be able to see here is the chalky white, how it looked. This was the same, and then now you can see we've got a nice even color of the original red, and that actually has responded beautifully to this technique. So yeah, what I recommend as well, don't try to do the whole part in one go, because it'll be A, too hot to handle, and B, you risk as you start to heat the whole thing up, it'll start to deform and go out of shape, and that's the last thing you want. So I'm going to let that cool down, and then I'll just basically do it in sections. So I'll do this section next, then this section, so on until I finish. But you can see, hopefully you can see there anyway, if the camera's picking it up, that has come out perfect. I mean, almost looks like the part is a new part. Now, unfortunately, something has been spilled. Something corrosive, it looks like, has been spilled on this, or maybe it's just scuff from boot. Maybe that's where some boot marks or something. So that's not oxidization of the plastic. That's actually the plastic has been scraped. So I think for that it's not going to recover with the hot air gun. I think what I'll do, I will go over the whole part first with the hot air gun, and then depending on how these parts look, I'll decide whether I want to maybe just wet sand those back and give them a light polish with some cutting compound. I may even, if that works, and it's going to be a little bit of an experimentation, you can see here, if that works well, I'll actually just polish the whole part anyway, because chances are I've got this back to a nice natural kind of matte finish with the heat gun, but if I sand this back and then polish it, it's going to be a little bit more shiny, and so I'll have to try to match the whole part to that. But let's see, that's part of restoring is experimentation. Okay, so as I'm sure you can see from the result, let's get it under better light, of the hot air gun, this part just came out absolutely fantastic with the air gun method. And in fact, where it had been scuffed, and I went over the scuff, it literally melted all the little strands of plastic, you know, the tufts of plastic, let's call it, that were sticking up from the scuff mark, melted those all flat. So I couldn't have hoped for a better response. I trimmed the decal like I said I would. Now there's some scrapes in here, and I got pretty close to the decal. You can see here, I don't know if you can pick it up on camera, but you can see where I couldn't quite get up to the edge of the decal with the hot air gun, so you can kind of see a little transition, but it's hardly noticeable. What I may do now, just try here where it's been scraped, I might just try hitting that with some 1000 wet and dry, to try to remove those scratch marks, and then instead of polishing it, which I considered before, I'll just hit it with a hot air gun again and see if it'll take the matte finish and melt it down basically to match the rest of the part. I suspect it will, because of just how well a couple of these, there was a big scuff mark here that responded really well. Based on that, I think it'll respond. So I'm going to try that now on camera and let's see. And if that's the case, then I can sand down some of these parts where there were scuff marks and then just heat them with a gun, and they should match the rest of the part. So yeah, let's try it out now. So we saw there, yeah, you could see I sanded all this down. There's still some scratch marks there, and I may, off camera, I may go at that some more. For sure there's enough plastic where I could take that out. Here you can see it. I can take that out. Yeah, and re-gloss it again, but yeah, it just shows you how great that, how good that technique can be. And like I said, I can go over this area where it was scratched and redo it. I've got an area here where there's a little bit of oil or something embedded in the plastic, so I could sand that out and redo it. But anyway, you've got the idea of the technique.
The chin fairing hasn't had the same sun exposure, so I just opt to give it a good clean with goof off. Then both parts get a coating of back to black for added sheen and protection. The lower fairing insert panels are ingrained with dirt and faded. So being the same material, they get the same treatment as the fairing extension. Here you can see the before and after, and both parts when finished. The rear side panels are scuffed, but have a special painted surface I don't want to try and replicate. So I opt to polish them out with Meguiar's Plasti-X and my DA polisher. The results are not perfect, but vastly improved. And finally, I finish off all the plastics by lightly polishing the rear hugger and nose cowl inserts. And with all the great progress made in this video, all that remains is to address the bodywork and reassemble this iconic 50. If you like this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And bye for now.